Lauren Philie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us to talk a little bit about the Curtis Fund. You're the new ED, the new executive director of the Curtis Fund. Is that right?
Yes, I've been there for about 2 years.
2 years. Well, you've been doing that for a little while then. You're still listed as new. Does it feel new?
No, actually, it feels very comfortable. I'm really glad to be there. I have come from a background in higher education, and so it was a great fit for me.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what is the Curtis Fund? What does it do? And
Right. The Curtis Fund is Vermont's largest private provider of scholarships. We provide scholarships for students pursuing degree programs and also short-term credentialed certificate programs in different trades like CDL, massage therapy, healthcare, coding, all sorts of things where you don't pursue a traditional degree path, but you go for a certificate program. And so we provide about 1,000 scholarships a year to Vermonters who are low income and or first generation to pursue post-secondary education.
And when you say this is one of the largest private providers, tell me a little bit about the structure of the Curtis Fund. Where did it originate? And you're part of the Vermont Community Foundation framework.
That's right. So actually, it started back in 1910 when a lovely woman who was a Burlington resident who didn't have any children left a bequest in her will to provide her entire estate, which was $120,000, which at the time was quite significant, to, and I quote, provide post-secondary education to men and women pursuing education via degree or in the trades. So Emma Eliza Curtis is who we have to thank for the Curtis Fund. And it was really, her foresight to provide that education for men and women and for degrees and for other certificate programs was really, she was ahead of her time.
Who was she?
So we don't know very much about her. We know she was married to a physician. Her husband had died. She didn't have children. And this was how she gave back. But other than that, we've done the research and we don't know much, unfortunately. So she left this bequest to a bank, a local bank at the time, which was Merchants Bank back in the day. And they ended up, the bank stewarded the funds and then ended up starting a nonprofit, which they named the Curtis Fund after Emma Eliza Curtis. And so we've been around for a while. And the way that we function now is that we contract with VSAC, Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, to help distribute our scholarships. They are an invaluable partner, and so we don't accept applications. We actually work with them through 2 of their programs. One of them is their Talent Search program, which is a college preparatory program in local high schools, and the other is their Educational Opportunity Centers, and those serve adults pursuing post-secondary education. So we serve both adults and graduating seniors coming out of high school, and we do it in those 2 ways. And the good thing about that is that those counselors who work one-on-one with those students make nominations for students that they think really could use our support, are likely to persist through whatever program they're pursuing, and the counselors are really familiar with their stories and their need. And so as a result, because they have those strong relationships with our recipients, we have a graduation rate, for our degree programs of 87%, which is well above the national average of, I think it's 62%.
And that's, you mean that in that case, it's a fund is giving money for somebody to go to school, and do they actually finish the program?
Correct.
Or succeed? And you
Right.
have an 80% graduation rate. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what that relationship is like with the folks at VSAC and how they make a nomination to you, and who's reviewing those nominations?
Well, we say nomination, but the Curtis Fund isn't involved in choosing the recipients. We trust VSAC to do that.
Got it.
And so when I say make a nomination, what I really mean is make an award.
Okay.
So they'll bring forward the names of the students that they're working with that they want to make those awards to, and we just,
And you just let them know we have room for this number of awards this year.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So we have an endowment and we award, a percentage of our endowment and funds, and we also fundraise. And so we look at how we've done with fundraising and how the endowment has performed, and that's how we know what our budget is for a year. We let them know, and then they know how many awards that they have to make for the next academic year.
Yeah, maybe you talk a little bit about what that's like for an endowment to have started in 1910 at 125,000. What has been the years of growth? What has gone into those years of growth to get you to the place where you are today?
Well, a very dedicated investment committee, right? And it's been a long time. So my understanding is at some points the fund has been close to zero and then built back up and then, declined and then built back up. And it's through the fundraising that we've really been able to grow it to the point that it is today. And one thing that, we started our Credentials of Value scholarship program. So I mentioned we give degree scholarships and we give scholarships for these short-term certificate programs. And we call that Credentials of Value scholarship program. That's newer. So we only started awarding those in 2018, and the budget for that program was only $25,000 at the time, which, as you can imagine, went quite quickly and has grown substantially now to the point where we're awarding $450,000 a year. And this year, we ran out of money to award halfway through the academic year. So the demand has been growing substantially for those sort of programs. And we've been fundraising, primarily fundraising for that program so that we can continue to grow it.
So you came into this 2 years ago as the new ED. Tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, and why are you the right fit for this position at this time, doing this work?
Sure. I have worked in fundraising for my entire career. So in college, I was passionate about rainforest protection, and I started a group to work on that. And then I realized, hey, we better raise some money and I better figure out how to do that. So what we wanted to do was show slideshows in local schools to children and get them excited about the rainforest too. And then I learned how to fundraise. And then I realized that there are a lot of nonprofits that could use help fundraising. I think Vermont has, the most nonprofits per capita in the country, and so there's no shortage of nonprofits and no shortage of roles that are looking for help with fundraising. But I spent the 12 years prior to this position at Vermont State University, which of course started out as Johnson State College and then went to Northern Vermont University and then progressed to be Vermont State University. And when I left that role, I was the Assistant Vice President of Institutional Advancement, so I was overseeing the fundraising and alumni relations. So in that time, my job was primarily fundraising for scholarships. It was fundraising for all the needs of the university, but a big part of that was scholarships, especially working with donors who really see the importance of post-secondary education and want to support that. Now, at that institution, of course, all the scholarships go to students at that institution. At the Curtis Fund, it's not dissimilar in the way that I'm working with people who see the importance of post-secondary education, of how it benefits our neighbors, and then ultimately how having our neighbors educated and working and thriving benefits communities across the state. The difference is that we don't dictate where our recipients can go to school. So while 60% of them do choose to stay in state to pursue degree programs, almost 100% of COV scholarship recipients are attending in state because they live locally and they're raising families and working. But even our degree scholarship recipients, 60% of them choose to attend schools in Vermont, 40% of them don't go out of state. And we don't tell a student where they can study because we don't want to limit the possibilities. So if you want to be a marine biologist, there isn't a school in Vermont where you can study marine biology, and so we don't feel it's up to us to put that restriction on the students.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the students and that concept of higher education benefiting not only the recipient but also the people around us and the neighbors. And I know Kevin was sharing a little bit of the website, and we saw a lot of the faces and the names of the recent graduates.
Yeah.
What have you learned about the people this fund is serving?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite parts is getting to speak with recipients and learn about their stories. Actually, we had an event last week where we had 10 recipients. Some are still in school and some recently graduated who came back and shared with.
This is the Celebrating a Brighter Tomorrow
That's
event?
Right. Yes, yeah. And it's so rewarding to spend an hour listening to student stories and to, learn about what their path was and how their lives have changed. And, I think ultimately what we're doing is trying to empower people. There are so many Vermonters who have dreams and motivation, and they would like to further their education and take an easier path. And the barrier is financial. They just can't afford the cost of the tuition or the program. And so when we can swoop in and remove that barrier, they're just fulfilling their own potential. And we hear these stories all the time. I mean, last week we heard from a gentleman, a father of 4, who had moved here from Africa and was able to get his CDL and is driving a school bus, but he's continuing to go to school and work toward being a nurse. So he got his certificate to be an LPN, and now he's working toward being an RN. We heard from a student who's studying to another CDL recipient, another student who was learning on ASL, so learning American Sign Language, which is pretty cool. We heard from a recipient who, or one of the stories that I'd like to tell is about Kylie, who she was working in retail, and her husband was also working sort of a retail type job, and they were ships in the night, right? So she was working during the day and he was working at night, and they weren't able to make ends meet. And then he got a Curtis Fund COV scholarship, and he was able to get his CDL, and then he is able to earn more money. That took the pressure off their family. She was able to get a Curtis Fund scholarship and then go get her LNA licensure, and then eventually go on to be an RN, and now she's working at Porter Medical Center as a nurse. And it's just transformed their family. They're able to take vacations. They're able to see each other as a married couple. They're able to pay all their bills. And they just it all started with that first scholarship for her husband that was able to relieve a little bit of the financial pressure off of them so that she could then go and pursue her degree program. So, there's no shortage of stories like that. Like I said, we serve almost, 1,000 people a year. And so there's all sorts of, different ways that people are benefiting.
Yeah. What are some of the, priorities of the board? You're overseen by a board of directors, right?
Right.
And what are some of the priorities or goals for this fund for that board of directors? Do you have changes that you anticipate on the horizon? It sounds like the Credentials of Value was a new program that you instituted in 2018.
That's right, yeah. Our mission is pretty simple. We provide the scholarship support. And so we are always honing in on how to do that better or how to do more of that. And I think an age-old question for anybody who awards scholarships is, do we give more scholarships in a larger amount, or do we give fewer scholarships in a larger amount, or more scholarships of a smaller amount, right? And there's no right answer to that. So that's something we're constantly discussing. But overall, what we're looking at is, how can we raise more money so we can give more scholarships? How can we grow the endowment? How can we increase the COV scholarship budget? We just want to give as many scholarships as possible. We're aware of, it's easy to get caught into a mission drift where you start to do too many things. But we hone in on giving these scholarships. That said, we have done some sort of pilot projects that have gone very well. We recently gave a grant to Lund to help them with their First Steps program, where they're educating early childhood educators in Chittenden County. And so we gave them a lump sum grant to cover the tuition and fees and advising for 2 cohorts of people who then can graduate with their certificates in early childhood and go right into the workforce. Which is such a need, When you pay attention to the news, it's like, we all know that we need more people working in childcare. And we did a similar program, too, that we've wrapped up that was 100% donor funded, where we educated 30 people across the state, again, to get their early childhood certificates, but we provided wraparound support. So we were able to fund the tuition, the fees, and then stipends to help them so that they could go to school full time instead of having to work full time. And it resulted in 30 people working in the field, and so it was tremendously successful.
Do you follow up with those folks to see how they sustain over 5 years out?
That's a good question. We're only a year out from that program,
Yeah.
so we may do that. And we have some partners. We worked with VTACI, so the Vermont Agency for the Education of Young Children, in that. And so, we may partner with them to do some follow-up on that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Sticking to your knitting seems so important, because there certainly are certain existential questions that you could be, just the cost of education altogether,
right.
Shifts in how people are approaching higher education or not.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like in implementing the Credentials of Value program in 2018, you're kind of recognizing that some people are not going to chase down a 2-year or 4-year degree program to meet the goals of, putting food on the table and a house over their heads.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And we look to partners in the state to work on these kind of things too. And so, we partner with the McClure Foundation, and I think you would ask me about our relationship with Vermont Community Foundation that I forgot to touch on, but we're a supporting organization of the Vermont Community Foundation.
What does that mean? Explain.
That means that there's 2 ways to answer this. So a supporting organization is an IRS designation, and it has to do sort of with tax code, right? But what it really means in practical terms is that we're under the umbrella of the Vermont Community Foundation. So we have our own, we are our own nonprofit under that umbrella. I'm the only staff person who works for the Curtis Fund.
Funds and put it into that.
Yes.
That whole big pot of money that
Correct.
we think of as the
But they
Vermont
help
community.
us with things like, doing our, payroll and benefits and doing financial management. And, we really benefit from being under that umbrella and having that network because they're able to help us with their expertise. So instead of being a staff of one, I'm a staff of one that has access to colleagues with all sorts of expertise. And so we're really appreciative for that. Relationship. And another supporting organization is the McClure Foundation, who also works on higher education, post-secondary education issues. And so we partner with them and, check in about sort of a pulse on the state and whatnot. And so, we have all sorts of sort of partnerships that we, look to just get educated on to say, okay, how are we doing with the way we award scholarships, and what should we be mindful of? What is the federal funding picture looking like? I meet every month with a team of my colleagues at VSAC, and we talk a lot about that, what's coming down the pike and, what's happening with federal funding and what's changing in the state. I mean, as you know, some of the universities have implemented free tuition for families making, under a certain dollar amount. And so that sort of changes and shifts a little bit of who might be receiving our scholarships and things like that. So
what is coming down the pike? What do families or anybody who's looking at higher education or, credentialed certificates that give them a leg up in the job market? What do they have to be watching out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a workforce Pell Grant that we have now, and there is a team of people working on how the state of Vermont, because it's up to each state to see how they'll implement that, and they're working on the guidelines for Vermont, so to be determined on that. But it's great news because, again, it sort of will extend how far our funding can go down the line of people who are waiting for it, so that's exciting. You know, in terms of higher education and how things are going, I mean, I think we all know that there is a population dip, and so all schools are struggling enrollment-wise, even UVM now, from, you know, what we've seen in the news, which my son is a student there, and when he started about 4 years ago, they had record enrollment, record applications, and now they're predicting a dip for the fall. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I guess that gets into, you know, you talked about the decision-making process and a little bit of the changing trends. What's next for you? What are you thinking about for this next couple of years?
we are looking at so right now our degree scholarship amount is $3,400 a year. It is covers 4 years, and there's no reapplication. As long as you enroll, then you continue to receive that funding. Our COV scholarships are up to $3,000 per. That's usually one-time funding because
so that's a single person can get $3,400 a year.
Yes.
For the course of 4 years of education.
Correct. Yep. Correct. And a COV can get up to 3,000. And so we'll continue to look at whether or not that's the right amount, or it's time to increase that amount. And I think what we're really just working on is building our base of supporters, because again, if we can raise more money, we can give more of those scholarships, or we can give higher amounts of those scholarships.
Yeah.
So that's primarily what's on our mind. And then what are the other opportunities? What are the workforce needs in Vermont? Like we said, we've done a couple things to try to help early childhood and child care issues, and what else is coming up? Are there other
what
areas? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
elder care.
Right. And I think we'd look to workforce development partners to help lead that discussion and see, if there's an opportunity for us to help with those kind of needs.
Yeah. Is the fund bracing for potential market fluctuations? Or do you have a steady cushion to carry us through some difficult times?
While we have a steady cushion, of course, we're always bracing for market fluctuations.
Yeah.
So, our investment committee meets quarterly with our financial advisors, and they are always keeping their eye on that. So, cross your fingers.
Tell me a little bit, as somebody who doesn't understand, what the investment committee, is that made up of folks who are from the VCF advisor fund, or is this inside the Curtis Fund?
That's an inside the Curtis Fund. So it's made up of board members, some volunteers from the community who aren't on the board, and our investment advisors.
Great.
And let me tell you, I am no expert, so I attend these meetings and I pay close attention and I ask lots of questions, but I really lean on their expertise, as does the majority of the board, and then they report back on how we're doing. So. Yeah.
Do you find that some of the Curtis Fund grantees are coming back as donors to the fund as they have grown in their economic success individually?
I do, and that really excites me. I love when it comes full circle and people, like to come and pay back, and so we're really trying to also grow that community. So in the past, I don't think we've done as good of a job as we could have at keeping touch with our recipients. And so I'm trying to build that network. We've implemented some new social media, and we're really building that database of former recipients to circle back to and check in with. And we try to support them in other ways too. We held this event last week, and I had hired one of the recipients to make some graphics. I've hired another recipient to write some stories that we use in some of our media. And so I feel like, we are a community and we want to support as many ways as we can. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Lauren Philie, for joining us and giving us a little update on what's happening with the Curtis Fund.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure folks know about before we close out?
No, I think the only other thing that we touched on before, and I didn't mention, was that we do, every other year, we do a survey of our COV scholarship recipients, just to keep our fingers on the pulse to make sure, you know, are these scholarships having the effect that we want them to have? And I'm very happy to report that indeed they are. So, you know, 70% of recipients are seeing an increase in wages. 95% of those recipients gain skills to use them in their job. There's a huge increase, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, although, of people who were unemployed and then earned a certificate of value and then went on to be employed too. So, you know, we are continually checking in to make sure that what we're doing is making a difference, and I'm happy to report that it is.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for watching. You can stay tuned for this. Watch this again at youtube.com/townmeetingtv, or stay tuned on the channel if you're watching for more great programs.